Hey everyone, me Kevin here. In this video, we're going to do a clean summary of what was just said in the State of the Union. We're also going to go through a summary of what Tucker Carlson's criticisms were. Tucker Carlson did have some guests on his show, so we'll keep the commentary mostly on what Tucker said versus what his guests said. But first, why don't we go through Joe Biden's State of the Union? We'll keep it as fast as possible. First, on the White House live stream event, comments and the chat were turned off. Joe Biden began his speech about 26 minutes after the hour with a quote on Franklin Delano Roosevelt facing an unprecedented moment. He's trying to compare basically 1941, pre-World War II era, to, well, today and the issues that we face today. Freedom and democracy are under attack at home and overseas, he says, and if anybody thinks that Putin will stop at Ukraine, Joe Biden says, I assure you, he will not. This is where we should really start with debate. This is where, on one hand, you have people like Joe Biden who say, Vladimir Putin won't stop at Ukraine. He'll keep going to Poland and he'll keep going further and deeper. That's why we have to stop Putin in Ukraine. Let's keep in mind that so far Russia's incursion into Ukraine has been mostly focused on the eastern regions of Donetsk and the Dnipro River. Now, what's interesting here is you actually have folks who agree that Ukraine is holding back Russia, and then you have others who say, no, Russia is purposefully not going any deeper because all they want is a buffer zone. And that's where you create a debate. The debate that Kamala Harris potentially left open the door that Ukraine could join NATO. We just had Sweden join NATO today. The minister of Sweden sat next to Jill Biden. They were welcomed to NATO by Joe Biden this very day. Finland joined about 11 months ago on April 4th, 2023, so NATO is clearly continuing its expansion, and the door was sort of left open for Ukraine to join NATO at one day. And so one argument is that Putin stops at the eastern region after he builds his buffer. That's also a region that controls about 90% of Ukraine's oil reserves and energy reserves. And so potentially that could be desirable for Putin to harvest. And some folks say he'll stop there, either by choice or by the Ukrainian military with the support of the United States. Others say if we don't support Ukraine, Putin will keep going. This is where you kind of have to make your own decision as to what you think. If you haven't yet seen the Tucker Carlson Putin interview, I encourage you watch it. Even if you don't like Tucker Carlson, you should watch it because Putin did like 98% of the talking. You really, out of like a couple hours, get about 5 minutes of Tucker. So it's a low percentage anyway. So if you want to see into Putin's mind, though, I did think that was a good video, and I did a summary of that as well on my channel. You just type into YouTube, Meet Kevin Putin, and you'll see it. Former President Trump was quoted by Joe Biden as saying, do whatever the hell you want. And Joe Biden calls that, quote, dangerous and unacceptable. This is a reference to Donald Trump saying, if you don't pay your NATO membership fees, then we will not come protect you. And suggests that if you don't pay your membership fees, we would go as far as encouraging Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell you want. Because Donald Trump is making sort of this exaggerated argument that it's really important that you pay your membership fee. It's kind of a very classic real estate point of view where you come from the angle of pay your rent or leave. That's kind of the POV you're getting from Trump there, where that speech came from. Joe Biden made sure to bring that up. Joe Biden mentions that NATO prevents war and that history is in the making, that January 6th, and this is, of course, Biden being political because half of the country doesn't believe this. But Joe Biden argues that January 6th supporters promoted lies about the election, but they failed and America stood strong. Of course, there are a lot of people, including Donald Trump, who highly disagree with that. Joe Biden says you can't love our country only when you win. That's obviously a slam on Trump. Political violence has no place in America. there was a bit of a back and forth about the IVF situation. Donald Trump actually got involved into fact-checking here. This was quite interesting. Biden talked about Mrs. Beasley, who's 37 years old and could not get her scheduled IVF. That's in vitro fertilization. That's basically when you inseminate an egg in a petri dish. That is in vitro fertilization. After you have in vitro fertilization, you can transfer the embryo into a woman after you give the woman drugs to be prepared for the embryo, and then you could grow a baby that is functional, that can work very well. A lot of people use that, especially those with fertility issues. However, on February 16th, the Alabama Supreme Court made a decision to ban, essentially, they unintentionally banned IVF by determining that frozen embryos were children. But on March 4th, we actually saw on March 7th, today, we actually saw Alabama's governor sign a law into effect allowing specifically in vitro fertilization. So Donald Trump actually truthed that change. That happened maybe a few hours ago. So it was kind of interesting to see Donald Trump truth that, hey, they actually allow IVF now, while Biden was talking about how IVF was banned. And then they had that mother there who was banned from getting an IVF transfer. Now she can. Joe Biden talked about, they had another mother sitting next to Jill Biden who had a fatal fetal anomaly and couldn't get an abortion in Texas. This is likely true. Texas rather does not allow fetal viability abortion. So like if the baby's going to die anyway, they do not have a fetal anomaly exception. So some pretty big words there. But anyway, a lot of states do, and that's usually what you see is most states allow abortion, including Texas, by the way, if the mother's life is going to be at risk. A lot of states allow a baby to essentially be terminated if they're going to die anyway, and that's usually to prevent damage to the mother. Most states do limit abortion after about 22, 23 weeks, mostly because, unless there's obviously some form of risk of death. And what you'll find is most of the abortion debate we have today sits somewhere between 16 weeks and 24 weeks in terms of like choice of abortion. Maybe you could go as far as saying 10 weeks to 24 weeks, especially if you look at DeSantis in Florida. Of course, there is a population of America that wants no abortion at all, zero. But it does appear, I would guess 70 to 80% of Americans are probably in that 10-week to 22-week period. And then, on one side, obviously, you have Florida, on the other side, you have California, and then there's a debate about where that line should be drawn. Keep in mind that most children, when they're in the womb, they have what's called an anatomy scan to see if, they have all their limbs and they're, capable of surviving at about 18 weeks. And a lot of women don't find out that they're pregnant until about week 5 or 6, sometimes even 7. So that's kind of why you have that debate come up. Just throwing that out as sort of trying to be as unbiased as possible. Even Donald Trump has suggested an abortion ban window of somewhere around 18 weeks. That's plus or minus where he's been sort of negotiating what his opinion is on this. A lot of folks are upset about the Roe v. Wade ruling, suggesting that this essentially prevented abortion from being able to occur. All that did was allow states to decide. So remember, that's important. Now states can individually decide their own rules. Of course, there is a debate that maybe there should be a unified national rule again. That is a debate. Household wealth, Joe Biden says, has expanded. This is true, but it's mostly expanded for white households. So yes, the gap between the top of the blue line and the yellow line has gotten a little less because the yellow and blue and the orange line at the bottom there have gotten a little larger. But the wealth gap is still pretty dang big between races here. Okay, then inflation did go from 9 to 3%. It's trending lower. That is true. Wages are up. That is true. Real wages are positive again. We did get bingo in our event. We got bingo from no mention of Trump by name, just a pronoun like other candidate. We got 50-year low on unemployment. We got that one word for word. We did get the freebie, Joe shows up. talk about the CHIPS Act, funding Ukraine. I didn't hear the Inflation Reduction Act part, but I may have just missed that. And we did have talk about Gaza and building a pier over in Gaza. That was an interesting one. So this idea that I guess America is going to work with Gaza and Israel to build a pier that gives access to land that could theoretically be gated so they could ship in aid rather than airdropping it and then sort of let it out there. That way you don't have to go through the Rafah crossing, let's say, where you've got a lot of turmoil right now and you've had disasters with aid shipments and deliveries going through Egypt. So you have some problems there that maybe a pier would end up solving, but somebody's got to build it. Joe Biden suggested no boots on the ground, but still somebody's going to have to build it. Presumably that would be Israel, who would then be funded to build it, and it would be Israelis who are building it with American dollars. We like to call those Biden bucks around here. Specifically, we joke that these are Biden bucks because when we're in the office, we're like, all right, which companies do we want to invest in? Well, let's start with which ones are getting Biden bucks. Anyway, the UAW president was there. Biden talked about how unions built the middle class. Talked about the $14.2 billion funding program called the Affordable Connectivity Program. This was basically a expanded affordable internet program that gave subsidies of $30 to $75 per month, 75 if you're tribal, to lower income areas for internet services. Joe Biden talked about when America gets knocked down, we get up. It kind of reminds me of the song. One of my employees had their kneecap dislocated when we went on a team ski trip. And while he was getting fixed up at the doctor's office, I was and then I got kicked out. I was blasting the music. When I get, what is it? Well, I get knocked down, but I get up again. Sorry, I had to go on the tangent, but I love that song. Anyway, cost of housing is coming down, Joe Biden says. He says he wants to provide an annual tax credit of $400 a month when you buy or upgrade a home to get a larger sized home. This is interesting. This is a proposal. It doesn't exist yet. This would essentially be the equivalent of getting about $64,000 for free in purchasing power on real estate. You can just sort of divide the number per month by about 6.25, and you get roughly how much more you can afford to pay in terms of real estate. He talks about getting rid of title insurance on refinancing for federally backed mortgages, saving about $1,000. He's not wrong, but in many areas that might be as high as $2,000. So getting rid of title insurance on a refinance for a Fannie or Freddie loan, that would actually be a great thing. Now, why they charge it is just frankly ridiculous in my opinion. Blockchain could probably entirely get rid of title insurance anyway, but that would help people reduce the cost of refinancing, especially as rates are so high. So I do support that. Well, he talks about building 2 million new affordable homes. I'm not a big fan of building new affordable homes, mostly because affordable homes or homes with affordable housing restrictions usually have limitations on your ability to build your wealth because they have either resale restrictions or rent restrictions, which I think are a mistake. I do agree with building 2 million new homes, removing that affordable restriction. The more homes you build, the more you make all housing more affordable. But affordable designated homes usually have real problems with them. So I'm not a big fan of that. I'm a fan of more normal homes. That's what I ran for governor on. By the way, if you want to meet myself and my team and other speakers in person, we're holding an event on June 21st to June 23rd in Vegas. We're announcing another speaker tomorrow at 1 p.m., so we'll be raising those ticket prices, and then we'll be announcing the location within Vegas within the next week or so. Joe Biden talks about cracking down on price-fixing landlords. This has to do with corporations out in Arizona that apparently were using sort of algos to coordinate rent hikes. That doesn't sound too good. So then he talks about builders getting federal tax credits, basically free preschool for low-income 3- and 4-year-olds, reducing debt for nearly 4 million Americans. This is true, by the way. About $138 billion of debt has been forgiven for about 3.9 million borrowers. Joe Biden talks about wanting to increase taxes on billionaires. He wants a fair tax code, and he says that the average tax rate for billionaires is about 8.2%. The Washington Post disagrees with that. I did a quick fact check. They say, quote, if you check the Treasury Department calculations themselves for what the richest Americans already pay in taxes, you would see that the top 1% pay in excess of 20% in income taxes and more than 30% when you add up all the taxes they pay. Biden talks about shrinkflation and rising prices. This is not a big surprise here. The biggest sort of contention, though, in his entire speech came about him suggesting, look, we had a border patrol bill, a really good border patrol bill. That's what, Joe Biden says. That bill got killed in the Senate. Joe Biden suggests that was because Donald Trump was told to call folks in the Senate and kill the bill. This might not be entirely untrue. In other words, it's probably true that Donald Trump pressured folks in the Senate to not pass this bill because the disaster at the border does make Joe Biden look bad. People say that Joe Biden is lying, that he has the authority to shut down the border. Joe Biden says he needed this bill to have the authority to shut down the border and to process more asylum claims, to have more judges and more authority to actually solve the border problem. It is worth noting, and it is true, that right now there are over 2 million cases before asylum judges. This is the chart of how these cases have moved up. There are a lot of pending cases for asylum, a lot of work to do. The immigration situation is a true crisis and a true disaster. Joe Manchin actually put out a piece on this, and he basically decided no longer to run for Senate because this bill failed. He said that the bill had the support of 18,000 Border Patrol agents who are fighting like hell. He said this is not political. This was a bipartisan bill. It would have hired 27 more Border Patrol and ICE officers and would have allowed them to remove every single adult without a lengthy judicial process. It would have ended catch and release so individuals could not simply claim asylum and be released into the country for 7 to 10 years. It would have increased deportations, raised the threshold for asylum, and ended parole at the border. Basically, it would have solved a lot of issues, and that bill got killed. Now, there are arguments as to why it got killed. Most of the arguments do point the finger at Trump, saying Trump didn't want it because Trump wants to pass the border bill when he's president. That's really probably going to come down to everybody's opinion on which way that leans. Marjorie Taylor Greene did shout about Lake and Riley regarding the border. She did actually hand Joe Biden a button. It's actually this button right here. We got a good picture of it. And Joe Biden did hold that button up during his speech, talking about this girl, this 20-something girl who was killed on a run by an illegal immigrant. And usually Democrats don't use the phrase illegal, but Joe Biden did here. So he purposefully wanted to go for that verbiage to make it very clear that he is also outraged about that, trying to show that everybody deserves to be outraged about that. And then, of course, he brings that back to why his bill should have passed. Joe Biden talks about raising the minimum wage, passing the PRO Act. The PRO Act, by the way, would expand labor rights for collective bargaining. A lot of the summary, by the way, it's at ehack.com if that's more convenient for you to kind of read some of the summary. I always try to throw these things up on ehack.com. Of course, I add more context and try to make it easier in the videos, but text-based is over there. Biden also said that Trump said, "Just get over it," after a shooting in Iowa. This was part of a longer speech of Donald Trump's. I'm not taking sides here. The actual full quote is, "It's just horrible, so surprising to see it here, but we have to get over it. We have to move forward." I don't think Donald Trump was saying, "Just get over it." I think Donald Trump was saying, like, all right, like it happened, let's move forward and maybe talk about solutions or what we could do to solve this. But yeah, the choice of wording there probably wasn't the best because it's sort of low-hanging fruit for Biden or some of the Trump detractors to pick up on. Joe Biden pledges to bring home the hostages, says that Hamas hides like cowards behind civilians. We talked about the pier already in Gaza, says that we have the lowest trade deficit with China in a decade. This is true. We've actually got a chart of that United States goods trade deficit with China. You can see that is actually the lowest in 10 years. So that was true. Joe Biden says it's a goal to end cancer. I think everybody wants to end cancer. And says he ends his speech with saying that he believes in the idea that we're all created equal. And even if he was too young at one point or now too old, he thinks he's still perfectly capable. Donald Trump argued that NATO was strong because Trump made them pay. Donald Trump claimed that Biden let in 15 million illegals. In 2021, at least, there were about 10.5 million illegals estimated to be in the country. So there is this sort of counter argument that like, wait, how could you have more than we have? But then there might be counting issues or whatever. It is worth noting there is a graph here of illegals in the country, and that number was actually declining from about 2009 to right about 2020, and you started seeing that tick up again right there in about 2021. Biden did take office in 2021, though it's unclear exactly where that chart begins within 2021. Donald Trump calls the climate change priorities the Green New Scam, blamed Biden for being substantially late. Trump said that Biden shouldn't shake people's hands as he's leaving because he keeps coughing into his right hand. Trump has been considered a germaphobe via his own books before. Tucker Carlson, you know, like, I really enjoyed Tucker Carlson's interview with Lex Friedman, and I really enjoyed Tucker Carlson's interview with Putin. I didn't really like Tucker Carlson's live response. To me, it was it was clearly pre-scripted. It was really, I think, mostly hyperbole. Tucker really only argued that we're closer to nuclear war today than we've ever been before, and that Mike Johnson is bought out and he's on board with supporting the Biden administration's agenda because he was nodding. Keep in mind, Johnson was promised by Democratic leadership that he'd be protected if he brought the $60 billion Ukraine bill to the floor for Democrats to vote on. Not necessarily saying he would vote for it or that others would, just like procedurally, can we negotiate to at least let the bill go to the floor? Keep in mind, Republicans control the House, so it doesn't even necessarily mean that it would pass. You would need Republican votes to get it to pass anyway, and so Johnson could bring the bill to the floor knowing full well that it would fail anyway. So it's probably more of a gesture of good faith. But Tucker Carlson's response really was that everything about Ukraine and Russia was just lie after lie after lie. He didn't really provide fact checks here. He I think could have gone a lot deeper. I think because they were trying to like rush a response, they put together a pretty quick response on Russia, and then they put a really quick piece together on voter ID. Now, I actually think Tucker landed an argument here. I personally do think that the way to make sure people can access voting is by showing an ID, but then if somebody can't afford an ID, then give away free IDs at the DMV after verifying somebody is who they say they are with their fingerprints or whatever, right? So like, I think you could solve the ID problem, but then have voter ID. Some people say, well, that's a barrier. Now somebody has to take off work and go to the DMV. Fine. Then like have funding for the DMV to be open on a Saturday and free IDs for, you know, low-income individuals who need it just to be able to vote, right? There are other ways of solving that. So I actually agree with Tucker on that one regarding the voter ID issue, though a lot of people see that as voter disenfranchisement, specifically more so those on the left. And again, I try to be balanced in my commentary here. It's ultimately up for you to decide. Tucker Carlson did have a couple of guests on. Alex Jones was the second one. I'm just gonna be honest, I didn't really listen to it. Mostly as soon as Alex Jones started saying everything was a lie, I had a feeling that we weren't gonna get many facts, so I did tune out of that. I'm not a big fan of saying everybody's a liar. I'm not here to say that Joe Biden or Trump don't lie, but I'm also here to say that they don't only lie. Like, both of them don't only lie. Again, that's for us, though, to figure out where the facts are. So that's what I tried to do. So that was sort of my takeaway of all of this. I was disappointed, really kind of disappointed in Tucker's fact check there, but whatever. He does his thing. So anyway, that's my commentary on his portion. And that is my summary of the Joe Biden State of the Union. So if you found this helpful, consider subscribing. We're getting close to that 2 million subscribers number, which is pretty cool. So consider subscribing. We'll bring you some more as unbiased as possible breakdowns. And do consider joining me over on at our Vegas event between June 21st to 23rd. Go to meetkevin.com to learn more about that. That's also where we have our courses on building your wealth. And really appreciate you all for being here. Thank you so much. Goodbye.